Welcome to Verity House Inspired. Today's video is about potatoes, and perhaps a little bit about multiplication. Before spring was even a twinkle in nature's eye, the Pixies were prepared out of sheer exasperation to plant potatoes. It was not, the golden pixie assured me with the greatest sincerity, because she had any desire to eat them herself, as she did not, but rather because the potatoes themselves wanted so desperately to be plants. On this point, she wasn't wrong. Every bag of potatoes we had purchased in the past year had carefully held their true intent inside until roughly 30 seconds after we arrived home with them, at which time they would immediately feel so comfortable that they would break out in sprouts all over. A circumstance not ideal for culinary objectives. So as the Pixies pointed out, there was nothing to be done but to give the merrily sprouting potatoes the desire of their heart and plant them. Bags of organic potatoes purchased under the mistaken notion that we would eat them were rounded up, and the Pixies, with a little help, prepared them to be introduced to their new bed. Each potato was cut into chunks containing a small amount of growth known as the eye, a piece of information the golden pixie found, well, unsettling. Nevertheless, she carried on, as she reasoned it was better to be planting the potatoes than for her to be eating the potatoes. I suspect that when Spanish conquistadors first fell in love with the strange tubers, a well-loved staple of the indigenous people of the Andes, and carried them back to Europe to share their new discovery, they could hardly have envisioned the humble root becoming the fifth most important food crop in the world behind wheat, corn, rice, and sugarcane. As it turned out, it was difficult to persuade anyone to willingly grow the newly introduced but ancient plant, as its relationship to the deadly nightshade plant made the average individual suspicious of its potential as a food source, a feeling the golden pixie fully appreciated. In her estimation, the potato is a highly overrated vegetable whose plausibility as a side dish was only given credibility by the genius of the French in accidentally inventing the French fry. She found it decidedly difficult to buy the story that the potato, not in fried form, has been credited by historians and farmers alike for saving the world time and again from famine and allowing the building of nations. But it has. The nutritious little tuber has kept civilizations alive through national disasters, inclement seasons, and bloody wars when other staple crops were all but wiped out. The ability to grow enough calories to sustain a family in a small garden plot eventually led to the potato in all its variations being widely embraced across the globe as more than just a pretty flower with an attractive foliage. In some places, such as Ireland, it became so depended upon for sustenance that when the potato blight hit and wiped out plants across the small country, over 1 million citizens died in what is accepted as the deadliest famine in history. In the U.S., potatoes are now the #1 veg crop, and most people no longer grow their own patch, but rather depend on their local grocery or big box store to obtain their potatoes, which is a shame, as potatoes can be grown almost anywhere with just a little bit of effort. Which is why we decided now was as good a time as any to learn how to grow a few potatoes of our own. After the potatoes were cut, the Pixies headed out to the fire pit. To roll the freshly prepped potatoes in the cool ashes and let them sit for a few days to heal their cuts. If you are unfamiliar with the Southeast, you may be unaware that we have a titch of humidity, and while there are varying opinions on the effectiveness of this exercise of rolling potato seeds in ash, it is the way I was taught and seems to serve as something of a defense in keeping the newly cut potatoes from rotting before they can grow. So while the ashy seed potatoes rested, the Pixies got to work preparing the little sprout's future home. This process was a tiring one and required more than one break before it was completely accomplished. They broke up the winter-hardened ground and shoveled worm casings throughout the turned-up bed, a necessary step as they had discovered that growing potato plants are hungry little upstarts that demanded a nutrient-rich soil to survive. Planting the now healed little seed potatoes was not difficult, but required an almost constant assessment of the fair dispersion of labor. I can only assume at some point in the future one or more of the Pixies will be a negotiator for the labor union, as a fair labor agreement was reached before the completion of the potato planting job. And once finished, all that remained was to give the entire potato bed a thorough drink. While everyone is aware of the tedious nature of a watched pot, few are probably aware that a watched potato is no longer in any hurry to show its face. And so it seemed like forever by the Pixies' evaluation before the little plants poked their heads above the earth and took a cautious look around. When the plants were about knee-high to Finnegan, we tucked a blanket of straw around them in the hope of encouraging them to produce more prolifically, and in the end to hopefully allow for an easier harvest, or so we reasoned. The evidence of this being a reasonable plan remains to be determined. As with almost everything we purpose to grow, the mantra is, if some is good, then more is better, right? So an experiment was devised, and more sprouting potatoes were planted into 5-gallon buckets with holes drilled in their bases and filled with organic soil and worm casings. planted buckets were then drenched with the golden pixie's magical brew of microbials and liquid nutrients from Fox Farm and left to their own devices. Which planting method turns out to be the more productive will be revealed at the end of our little endeavor. For now, the golden pixie is simply relieved that we are growing the potatoes and not attempting to feed them to her, as her mother has rarely demonstrated the refinement of a French chef in the court of Louis XVI in preparing her potatoes in the acceptable form of crispy fries. So enthusiastic a budding potato identifier and planter she is to this point that I haven't the heart to inform her that for each new sprouted piece of potato we plant, we multiply by an average of 8 to 10 in return. Whether you mean to or not, everything you sow has within it the potential to do that tricky mathematical discipline called multiplication. After all, the universe and all of creation is, at its core, inherently mathematic. Where it concerns the golden pixie, I suppose we'll cross that mathematical bridge when we come to it. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time.